Hey guys, today I want to take off the jiu-jitsu belt and put on the metaphorical camping hat and talk about a crazy project that I've been working on, been dreaming about literally for 20 years, and I think, Lord willing the creek don't rise, I'm going to give it a shot this summer. And that is a 1,000-mile solo canoe trip starting in the northern boreal forest of Canada and going into the tundra and ending up in Hudson Bay. And yes, solo means by myself, and I'll talk a little bit about why I want to do that by myself and what the challenges are. I just wanted to share some of this with you, and I don't blame you if you're only interested in me for the martial arts stuff, great. We'll see you on the next video, we'll see you on the next podcast. But if you're interested in this, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, obviously I've been working towards it for a long time. So the logistics of the trip. I want to start in Missinippi, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, it's a big province. Mississippi is right near the top. It's on the Canadian Shield. I'm going to be starting in Missinippi. It's where I used to work for a canoe guide ages ago. My friend Rick Driediger runs Churchill River Canoe Outfitters. I figured it'd be neat to start there. Then I'm going to go downriver on the Churchill River, which is an old trade route where the old fur trade used to be, used to be an artery of fur trade traffic. Go down that for several hundred kilometers, then hang a big left and start heading directly north up the Reindeer River. So heading upriver, that's always more difficult than heading downriver for obvious reasons. Head up that for a couple hundred kilometers until I get to Reindeer Lake, which is a gigantic lake. I mean, this thing's like 200 kilometers plus long and very, very wide. It's huge open expanses of water. Continue up along there, picking and choosing my way through the islands. Eventually coming out at an inlet of another river, the Cochrane River. And from the Cochrane River, I'm going to be going upriver again for quite a distance, working my way up the rapids, up the lakes, getting close to a really cool area. Because the Cochrane River eventually drains into Reindeer Lake, which drains into the Churchill, which ends up the Churchill River. Up near there, there's a couple of watersheds where rivers go in totally different directions. So eventually I'm going to get to a small lake where if I hike over an esker, which is a big ridge of sand, for about a couple hundred meters, I'm going to end up in a totally different river that's going to end up in a totally different place. That's the Fluviase. And it's going to, initially it's just a tiny, tiny creek. So it's going to be a little lake, and then portage, then a little lake, and then portage, then a little lake, and then portage. Eventually the river will pick up enough steam to actually be paddleable. This will take me down to Newelton Lake, which is another gigantic lake, just littered with islands, and probably 1,000 islands in that one lake. That's, I think, 150 kilometers long, south to north. And the cool thing about this lake is the bottom part is in the trees. It's in the forest. And as you paddle up, the trees get smaller and smaller. You enter into the land of little sticks, which is how the natives used to refer to it, until you finally end up at the tundra, at the north end of the lake. And at this point, this big giant lake has collected enough rivers so that the outflow of it is pretty big. I'm going to follow that river all the way down to Hudson Bay, and that's going to be more hundreds of kilometers. All told, it's just under 1,000 miles, which is why I'm using the hashtag 1,000milesolo in some of my social media stuff to prepare for this. So typically people have a couple of questions right off the bat. First is, solo trip. Does that mean that you're going alone? The answer is yes, it does. I am going alone. So then the next question is, why? Well, the terms of my restraining order forbid me from being within 100 kilometers of anybody until the charges get reviewed. No, not at all. I like going into the bush with people. I really like it. But going into the bush with people and going into the bush by yourself are two very different experiences. Chinese food versus Greek food. They're both great. I both like them, but they're different experiences. Incidentally, the other kind of dividing line is trips under a week and trips over a week. I love going on trips. And think of it as a quadrant, right? Trips with people under a week, trips with people over a week, trips by yourself under a week, trips by yourself over a week. So these are very different experiences. I find that short trips are fantastic. Short trips are great, but you don't get into that rhythm where every day it begins to feel normal to wake up in a tent, to make your breakfast over a stove or a small fire, pack all your stuff in a boat, fight your way upriver, upwind, across the lake, down rapids for 20, 30, 40, 50. The most I've ever gone in a day is 80 kilometers. And then, set up camp, pitch your tent, make dinner, repair something, because there's always something breaking on these trips. Every single day you're doing repairs. This trip I'm going to be trying to blog. I'm going to be trying to post to my Instagram. I'm going to be trying to post to this podcast, to my podcast as well. So that's going to take some extra time. Go to bed, wake up the next day and repeat. So hopefully, what I found in the past is going for longer than a week, you get into the mindset where this begins to feel normal. And it's this tectonic shift in the experience of the outdoors. And I'm really looking forward to that, because for the last 15 years, I've been in the throes of raising kids. I've been in the throes of growing grapple arts, and I'm not giving up on grapple arts. Grapple arts is going to keep on going strong in the fall. I got a ton of plans for grapple arts in the fall. I'm really looking forward to getting back to training. I'll be totally dehydrated for not having trained for months. Be a great time for you to try and tap me out. I'm going to work on coming back at least in shape so that I can relearn jiu-jitsu pretty fast. So I'm not done with jiu-jitsu, not done with grapple art, not done with my kids. Just taking a 6 week to 2 month break. So the other question, why go alone? Going alone is a very different experience. And when I did my first big solo trip alone, it's redundant, solo trip means alone. When I did my first big trip, it was for about 4 weeks. And it's funny, you're going into the bush, you've got plans for polar bears, you've got plans for black bears, you've got plans for storms, you've got plans for whitewater. You know what was really worrying me? Big, tough outdoor guy goes out there and feels lonely. That's what was scaring me. That was my biggest concern. And I'll say that on my other big trips, most of which were in my 20s, because like I said, you got to that adulting thing that kind of screws up your entire life there for a while. I don't think I ever felt lonely, not one time. Not one time. I did say to myself, man, wouldn't it be cool if I could show this to someone else? Look at that sunset. Look, the moose just came through this swamp, and you can see the footprints in the water, and they're smoking because the moose just came here. I don't know where the moose is, but he must have been here a minute ago. That would have been so cool to show to people. Look at the loons going crazy on the lake. Look at this amazing set of rapids. Look at how this esker makes this perfect campsite here. Like there's wood, there's fresh water, there's wind. This is heaven on earth. That would have been nice to share with people, but I never felt lonely. So there's an important distinction there. And I think going alone really allows you to get deep into the process. There aren't very many people as well. There is no restraining order, but there aren't very many people with whom I'd want to be cheek by jowl with for 6 weeks. The very small, short list of people with whom I'd want to spend that much time. Sadly, they're doing the whole adulting thing. Jobs, kids, commitments. It's really hard to find people to take that much time off who are also competent woodsmen. Because I've ended up on long trips with people 1,000 miles from nowhere, and then found out, the whole trip is based around hiking. We're going to climb up into this mountain range, and we're going to use the river to access this. We're going to get up to some limestone areas, and then found out that they're afraid of heights, and watched that whole trip plan dissolve, and then had to come up with a plan B. So people react unpredictably because it's such a foreign environment for most people. Some people, I've been with people who've lost their minds about bugs. Like, bugs are a huge part of the north. That's why there's nobody up there. The amount of mosquitoes during the height of mosquito season, the amount of black flies during the height of black fly season is insane. You want to go out, in and out of your tent. So you just want to go into your tent at night. So you've set your tent up, you've got it zipped shut. God help you if you left it open when you set it up. So you go far away from your tent and you run towards your tent. Literally, you're running. You dive down, you open the zipper, you dive in, you turn around, close the zipper. Maybe it's a 5-second operation. Then you spend the next half hour killing all the mosquitoes that came into the tent with you. Otherwise, you're going to wake up in the morning and it's going to look like you have smallpox. The number of bugs, the hum of the bugs is crazy. And I always look at them as guardians, right? They're guardians of the north, because if there weren't 1,000 million, billion, trillion, quadrillion bugs up there, there'd be that many people. because it's really beautiful. Incidentally, the bugs also pollinate all the blueberry bushes, all the cranberry bushes, which is why in the fall, hope to catch a little bit of this, the bonanza of berries and flowers there is just insane. I mean, you're looking out, there's an old Stan Rogers song about Franklin and his field of flowers up north. There are fields of flowers out on the tundra. It's just amazing. So going alone allows you to go deep. It allows you to spend some time by yourself. It allows you some time to reflect. And I'm trying to split the difference this time. I'm going to do all that, and I'm going to try and share some of that using electronics. So another question people have asked me is, what kind of electronics am I taking? Well, first of all, you're completely, absolutely out of cell phone range. There ain't no cell phones up there. You are in satellite phone range if you get lucky, and if you're rich, because it's really expensive to make a satellite phone call. That's really only for emergencies. That's really only like, I've broken my leg and I'm going to die, come get me. Or, happy birthday, Dad, I hope everything's well, I got to go. It's for super short calls. So there is satellite communication if your phone is charged, if there's no hill in the way between you and the satellite, if the weather conditions are right, if the satellite isn't broken. It's not a slam dunk. I'm going to be taking a Garmin InReach. So it's got a very rough mapping thing, mostly for mapping. I'm using paper maps. I find it much easier to navigate with paper maps. I spent over $650 on maps. It's a crazy amount of paper that is required to cover 1,000 miles of distance of a winding river where you go this way, you're going to travel 2 days and come to a dead end. You travel this way, you keep on going the right way. The little details are important here. So I'm going to have paper maps. I'm going to have a Garmin InReach, which can send basic text messages. I'm going to be taking some kind of recording device. I'm going to be, hopefully, no promises, if I can fit it in the boat, which is going to be a problem. I'm going to be taking a small satellite dish. It's called a BGAN unit. Never used it before. Fingers crossed, I can upload, say, maybe a picture a day that's going to go to my Instagram, Stephan_Kesting.com. I think it's going to be really cool. So please do follow me there and check in. The trip starts in early July, probably July 1st to hit the river, maybe a day earlier. I don't know exactly yet. And it's going to continue to the middle of August. I'm going to try, no promises, I'm going to try to upload a picture a day. I'm going to try to do podcasts from the field, just talking about the progress of the day. So it's going to totally go away from martial arts. Although if I'm musing about martial arts, I'll share that as well. I think it's going to be an interesting way to share the experience with other people. I won't be able to see your comments. I won't be able to receive emails. Fortunately, one of the things actually, thinking about this trip for the last 20 years and really hard for the last year, I was like, man, do I need to get some help to run grapple arts? Do I need to get some support that when an email comes in, that I'm not the only person answering emails. I'm not the only person helping people access their products. I'm not the only person dealing with emergencies. So part of that was actually a great kick in the ass to be able to, predetermining in advance, I'm going to be out of commission for 2 months, yet the business needs to keep on going, was a fantastic way to set up the systems, translation, a person with the routines, with the passwords, training her, getting her up to speed, and it's been working amazingly well. An amazing way to set up those systems to give myself a bit more freedom. Normally I'm using that freedom to create more content. That's why I can produce so much video content, so many instructionals, so many blog posts. It's because somebody else is handling that. But it's also going to allow me to take off and disappear up north for a couple of months and hopefully come back. Brings up another question. What am I going to be eating? A lot of food is the answer. Based on previous experience, especially when you're working hard, you're burning about, somebody my size, especially in the cold, is burning 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. That's a lot of calories. It's probably twice the recommended amount of calories per day that somebody of my height and weight should be eating. But it's important. J.B. Terrell, one of my favorite explorers from up north, was asked at the end of his life what he had learned from doing all of this exploring in the Canadian North. And he had said, I learned that only two things are important, food and warmth. And if you can only have one of those, go with the food. Food is everything. An army marches on its stomach. Stephan's going to paddle and portage on his stomach. because you need that internal engine going at all times. The plan is I've got a bunch of predetermined breakfasts. In a typical week, it's going to be about 4 oatmeals with dried fruit. I posted some pictures of that on my Instagram. It's going to be a couple other kinds of cereal, and then once a week I'm going to have a freeze-dried thing of scrambled eggs. I'm probably going to be combining that with a shake, like a protein shake, pre-mixed package, and hopefully that'll get me through the morning. No lunch. Lunch is just going to be a series of snacks, typically 2 salty snacks and 2 sweet snacks. The 2 sweet snacks, basically variations of chocolate. I'll be surprised if I'm eating less than about 120 grams of chocolate a day, probably up to 200 grams someday. It's just a really dense form of energy, and any energy in is going to be burned right away. Salty is going to be things like crackers. It's going to be things like nuts. I'm really limited on taking cheese and taking fresh meats. It's almost impossible. Dinners are going to be pastas, dehydrated pasta sauce. It's going to be freeze-dried veggies mixed with rice or mixed with quinoa or mixed with easy-to-cook, quick things like pasta with some spices. And once a week, maybe twice a week, I'm going to have an MRE or have a freeze-dried dinner, just for variety. In fact, I'm usually going to be having 2 freeze-dried dinners because the average dinner has got about 1,000 calories. You go into the sporting goods store and you go to Cabela's, you go to Mountain Equipment Co-op, you go to REI, you get one of those freeze-dried packages. It's probably got about 1,000 or 1,200 calories of food in it, calories of energy. So I'm going to have 2 of those put together just to pound the energy and try and rebuild the body that's going to be getting torn down. What are the dangers? Well, I talked about the bugs, and they're an incredible irritant, they're an incredible impediment. Not really a danger. I mean, if you're out there on the tundra naked, you're going to have all the blood sucked from your body. That's easy enough to mitigate by wearing long sleeves. I'm not taking any bug dope. There's too many bugs for Muskol or the DEET bug repellent. It's going to be netting. Basically, you wear netting all the time. You wear leather gloves. You seal your wrists. This is during the height of the bugs. And you just keep moving and look for windy places. So I wouldn't even really call that a threat. It's just a factor to contend with. The big threats, really, the first one, hands down, is hypothermia, especially exposure in the water. The big lakes kill way more people than the rapids, kill way more people than the bears, kill way more people than any other factor. If you're crossing large lakes and you're out in the middle between 2 islands, you're like, man, I could go around the outside here and that would take about 10 kilometers and just cut straight across and it'd be 5. That's really dangerous because it might take you an hour to make that 5 kilometers, during which it's the Arctic. It can snow any month of the year, including July and August. Also, storms come up so quick. Storms come up so quick that it can turn a pretty placid lake into a no-go zone. I've been stranded for 3 days on a lake that was maybe the size of 3 football fields. The wind was blowing so strong, I could not launch my canoe into that lake without dying. That's a reasonably small lake. Okay, it was a little bit bigger than that, but no bigger than 10 football fields. And some of these lakes are hundreds of kilometers long, so if the wind's blowing the wrong way, you're staying put. And that's by far the biggest hazard. So taking a wetsuit, taking an inReach, taking a life jacket, but all those are second, third, and fourth lines of defense. The first has judgment. The first is, I see white caps. I'm not paddling today, and that's hard. That's really hard, because you want to go. I've got a limited amount of food. After making this video, I don't want to make another video explaining why I pulled out 2/3 of the way. That would suck. That would really suck, and it's actually the main thing I'm worried about here. I'm not worried about being lonely no more, because from previous trips I know that loneliness isn't going to be a factor. I'm worried about this trip not working out, me having made a big deal about it on social media, me sharing it, and then like, oh yeah, it didn't work out. But you know what? Not everybody wants to climb Everest, climbs Everest. If you're going to succeed 100% of the time with your goals, then your goals aren't ambitious enough. Back to dangers. Number 1, big lakes. Number 2, rapids. There are there's 1,000 miles here, probably 600 miles of river. Upriver and downriver, up rapids and down rapids. Rapids can be dangerous. Again, judgment's the main thing here. I'm a pretty good whitewater paddler, but it's a world of difference paddling in a small 10-foot whitewater boat kitted out with airbags, helmet, life vest, a bunch of people around you who know rescue procedures, and being out there alone with a boat. The boat probably cost you $5,000. Your tent, that's another grand. By the time you add it up, that's probably 20 or 30 grand of material there with you. If you have to get choppered out, that's going to be another $5,000. Or you're going to be, hiking out across incredibly difficult terrain. The cost, physical cost, the monetary cost of wiping out in a rapid and losing everything is really high. Not to mention dying. Dying would also suck. Paying $35,000 out of pocket, that would suck almost as much as dying. So that's a really good limiter on I could paddle this, but just because I could do it, if I'm that close to the edge, I'm not going to do it. The other thing is bears. There are a lot of bears here, and we're starting out in the forest, so we're talking black bears. Then as we get into the tundra, we're talking grizzly bears, and as we get closer to Hudson Bay, we're talking polar bears. Of those three, hands down the most dangerous is polar bears. Polar bears don't eat vegetables, they don't eat berries, they eat seals, which are roughly human-sized. Right? They are 100% carnivore. Also in the summertime, they're on the shore. They're not actively hunting, but they're certainly not averse to getting an extra snack. So I've had friends who've had to shoot polar bears at close range as they were trying to come into their tent. Tons of stories of polar bear attacks, to be a strong word. Polar bear coming into camp, ripping tents apart, destroying the food cache, and then wandering off. And in the wrong place, that can be a life-threatening emergency, because now you're left without any gear, and you're left with, 40 miles to cover on foot across really inhospitable territory to get maybe to the nearest native settlement. That's best case scenario towards the end of the trip. Earlier, because the polar bears do go inland a certain distance, especially to den, now you're talking mother polar bear with cubs, so super aggressive and defensive, passive-aggressive, defending their cubs, it could be a much longer walk than that if all the stuff got destroyed. Bears are an issue. To answer the inevitable question, yeah, I'm taking a gun, taking a 12 gauge, folding stock, Winchester Marine, if you must know, alternately loaded with slugs and buckshot. I spent a ton of time in the bush. Never take a firearm for black bear. Almost never take a firearm somewhere where there's going to be grizzly bear. Polar bear, you're an idiot if you don't take a big gun. You need something with a massive amount of stopping power. I mean, a polar bear's skull, if you've ever held a piece of polar bear bone, it's so heavy. Why is it heavy? Because it's so dense. You hold a polar bear jaw in your hand and a deer jaw in your hand. One weighs 3 times as much as the other, even if they're roughly the same size, which they're not. But per unit size, it's way denser because it's so strong. And a polar bear's head charging polar bear's head is kind of like a triangle, right? The snout is there, then the forehead is there. Lots of accounts of people shooting bear and the bullet ricocheting off the skull. It's a bit less of an issue with a 12 gauge slug. It's a bit less of an issue with double-aught buck, but still a possibility. So, I'm not a huge gun guy. I don't always carry a gun when I go in the backcountry. In fact, I almost never carry a gun. Carrying a gun this time. I've had other encounters with bears where I've had to use them either as noisemakers or drawing a mental line in the sand. Going, that bear crosses that line, I'm pulling this trigger. Hopefully it doesn't come down to that. I've never actually seen a polar bear wild. I've found polar bear bones. I've seen polar bear footprints in the sand. And the footprints are the size of dinner plates. That's a paw. They're gigantic. And they're so powerful. I mean, people who haven't spent time around bears just have no idea. Even a black bear. Black bear's walking along, shambling along, looking a bit like a dog, and then boom! It goes up and jumps 10 feet up a bank, and then it shambles along. I mean, the power that those animals have is incredible. So, that's certainly the bear danger. It's not the biggest danger, but it is something to take care of. Then ultimately there's things like trauma, breaking your leg on a portage. Been dealing with tendonitis in my elbow for a couple of years now. I think it's better now. I've got a bunch of tools. In fact, I'll tell you what the tools are. I'm taking 3 different kinds of paddles. I'm taking a straight shaft canoe paddle, a bent shaft canoe paddle, and then an ergonomic kayak paddle. And my hope here is that by altering the types of paddle I'm using, and also I've got a sail rigged on my boat, a Falcon sail, 1.4 meter Falcon sail. It's a pretty fancy sail that I can take some of the wear and tear off the elbow. The sail, I'm hoping to make some distance on the lakes, right? I might even cook a meal and then get in the boat for a couple of hours and eat the meal on the boat at the end of the day when I'm totally exhausted. Get another 10K, get another 20K. But by altering the type of paddle I'm using to drive myself, I'm hoping that I can take some of the strain off the elbow. It's like varying your training, right? Like if you always do exactly the same game in jiu-jitsu, you're going to get a repetitive strain injury. If all you're ever doing is spider guard, you're probably going to screw up your fingers. So once in a while, you should say, I'm not gripping any cloth this month. I'm going to do no-gi, and I'm going to work no-gi butterfly and give those fingers a chance to heal. I'm hoping to do the same thing with the paddles. In fact, long distance paddling, long distance canoeing, long distance anything really is a matter of continuously changing your game to accommodate your latest repetitive strain injury. You always have to be modifying your technique. When I'm doing long ultra hikes, I have to modify the way I'm hiking. I'm going to take longer steps. I'm going to take shorter steps. I'm going to change boots. I'm going to remove inserts. I'm going to start using poles. Just change the way that you're wearing down your body. People are asking me about other gear. What other gear am I taking? Well, I'm limited here, right? I've already got food. And food, there's no options there. Even if you dry everything, carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram, which means that a kilogram of food is 4,000 calories. It's a little bit less than that because there's still some moisture in the food. It's a little bit more than that if there's fat. But on average, 4,000 calories per kilogram of food is a pretty good estimate. You got to add to that fuel. You got to add to that cooking stuff. So I'm looking at, for 50 days, I'm looking at about 50 kilograms of food, which works out to about 120 pounds, which works out to about 130 or 40 pounds of food stuff. So that's just the food. Now we're talking tent, we're talking repair kit, which is incredibly important. We're talking a medical kit. We're talking way more electronics than I've ever taken in the bush before. So you have to cut in some areas. The area I'm going to be cutting in is clothing. I'm going to be taking basically one set of pants, one set of long johns, like a fleece layer for when it gets cold, a couple pairs of shirts, a t-shirt, a long sleeve shirt that I can close off against the bugs, some kind of fleece, and then rain gear. Rain gear is by far the most important thing here. Rain gear is your windbreaker. Rain gear is the thing that's going to keep you alive when the winds are blowing horizontal and there's sleet being blown up your nose. It can be incredibly challenging weather up there, even in the middle of summer. So, especially once you get out on the tundra where there's no trees to break the force of the winds. So rain gear is by far the most important thing. A hat, gloves, because you need to cover up the hands or the bugs are just going to eat those alive. A pair of shoes, it's going to be a pair of quick draining, reasonably sticky rubber shoes. And then possibly a shorty wetsuit. The shorty wetsuit is going to be for heading upriver. Because when you're heading upriver, inevitably you're jumping, at some point, you're going to jump in the river. There are techniques for getting up a river. You can use a pole to pull yourself up a river. You can use ropes to guide canoes upriver. It's called lining. You can portage upriver, but ultimately, at some point, you're going to be standing in the water, hauling your boat up. And you can get really cold. On my first long trip, I gave myself trench foot. Trench foot is this condition that hasn't really been seen much since World War I, when people were standing in trenches in cold water for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. It's sort of like a form of frostbite. And it took like a decade for my feet to regain normal feeling. I'm lucky. I didn't need toes amputated. I was just wearing clothes and my feet were wet and cold for a couple of weeks. It definitely damaged the nerves. I'm lucky that those nerve endings regrew. My feet feel fairly normal now and I've got decent circulation, but I've learned my lesson. So I'm going to add to that clothing list a pair of wetsuit socks just to keep the feet warm. So wetsuit socks, a shorty wetsuit for hauling the stuff upriver. But you got to go light here. Like, am I going to take an axe? I don't know. If I take an axe, it's going to be a little tiny tomahawk, and that's really only for splitting wood. It's not going to be fighting bears with a tomahawk. If I might be able to reduce that to just a knife. When it's raining for days and days and days and days, What you really need is a saw, so you can cut lengths of wood. It's not big trees up there, right? Most of the trees are the size of your forearm. Maybe there's a few that are the size of your upper arm. That's it. You can cut those into sections, and you can split them. You'll usually find dry wood inside. I am taking fuel, taking a stove. It's interesting. If you go and check out my podcast that I did with Will Gadd, the guy who ice climbed Niagara Falls in the middle of winter, he talked about using a spreadsheet to organize all this. So I've got a spreadsheet now, right? A spreadsheet for logistics. How do I get to the starting point? How do I get from the end point back to civilization? That's not as easy as you would think. The logistics on this are killer. They're so complicated. Well, you know, if Joe might be able to come pick you up, but it depends. Is he going to be in town? And then you got to get from Arviat. You might need to go up to Rankin Inlet, which is going north, and then you can go south, and then you can... What about the gear? Do I burn the gear on the shores of Hudson Bay? Do I bring it back? Do I get it shipped? How do I get all that back to my home? The logistics are killer. So that's a tab on my spreadsheet. And next sheet on my spreadsheet is food. Next sheet is gear. Next sheet is repair kit. Next sheet is medical kit. Next sheet is electronics. What do I need? How do I, what kind of solar panel do I need? It's astoundingly difficult. There's a saying that amateurs speak of tactics, experts speak of logistics. There's never been more true than something like this. People are asking me, what am I doing to prepare physically for this trip? And I should be paddling every day. But you know what? It's even more important that when I get out into the middle of Newton Lake and I put a hole in my boat, that I remember to have brought the right tape and the right epoxy to patch the boat. That's more important than being in shape. I'm doing my best to build my engine, to do the cardiovascular training and the upper body strength training. I'm doing my best to do that. But the logistics of this are even more important. You screw up on those, there's no amount of fitness can help you come back. It's like the guy coming into jiu-jitsu class. I can bench 500 pounds, but he can't get out of side control. The knowledge of what to do and having the tools to get out of the bad position are not compensated by crazy amounts of fitness. I would love to be able to spend the time to have my fitness at a maximum and have all the logistics done. Ultimately this close, I'm about a month out from leaving, I got to get the logistics covered. So I wish I had a sexier answer for people who are asking me what I'm doing for training. I'm trying to do cardio hard 4 times a week, trying to weight train something upper body 5 or 6 days a week, because that's faster than putting the boat on the car, driving down to the water and paddling for several hours and then coming back. In the time that I take to do that, I can get a short workout in and I can figure out what I'm going to be having for lunch and going to buy it and packaging it in like 12 layers of plastic so a bear can't smell it. That's more important than fitness at this point. There are a couple of reasons that I'm doing this trip. One is purely selfish. I went up there, I did all these trips in my youth years ago, and I'd like to do it again. I've been dreaming about this country, Newton Lake country, the land of little sticks, for decades. And I want to get back there before I'm too old to do it. Will I be able to do it in my 60s and 70s? I don't know. My late 40s seems like a pretty good time to head up there while I still have a functional body. But the other big reason that I'm doing this is to give hope to people who are going through really difficult physical times. As I've talked about in a previous podcast, a few years ago, I was dying of kidney failure. My kidney function was down to 12%, and it was a kidney transplant from my brother that saved my life. It was a really tough recovery. There were multiple crazy infections. There were multiple follow-up medical procedures. Removing the 2 bad kidneys that were in there was also incredibly painful. It took me a couple of years to get back on my feet and near to full speed. And it took a lot of faith. It took a lot of faith and determination saying, I'm fucking going to get better. I'm not going to let this stop me. And even if it does stop me, I can't have that attitude. I got to pretend that I'm not going to let it stop me. Realistically, some crazy superbug comes along, nestled in my kidneys, and I'm dead. All right, I can't control that. But I'm going to act as if. I'm going to act as if I'm going to get better. I'm going to do everything I can to get better. So I'm hoping that by pulling off this crazy 1,000-mile solo trip through difficult country, that I can give some hope to people who are going through cancer, to people who are going through a divorce, to people who are waiting for a kidney transplant, to people who are dealing with some kind of chronic medical condition. As I talked about in that previous podcast episode, I gave the details there. If you are on the donor list, if you've signed up to be an organ donor, send an email to me or to my helper at support@grapplearts.com, and we'll give you an instructional for free. If you've given part of your body, if you've made a bone marrow donation, if you've donated a kidney, part of your liver, something like that, send me an email, send me some proof, and I'll send you everything that I have for free. So I'm trying to incentivize people to sign up, do their organ donor cards. I'm trying to give hope to people who are in difficult medical situations by showing that, yes, I was on death's door, 12% kidney function. That's really not good. Walking around like a zombie, unable to walk from one end of the block, and I live on a small block, to the other end without having to lean against a wall to catch my breath. That's a pretty low point for somebody who's been active their entire life and now brought low. So I've come back, going to try my very, very best to pull off this damn trip. Hopefully I don't have to do a follow-up email explaining why it was a victory even though it was a failure. No, it could fail. Totally could fail. I hope it doesn't. To wrap this up, I just want to read one of my favorite passages from this book, Sleeping Island by P.J. Downes. P.J. Downes, in the 30s, traveled up in Newton Lake country, and he wrote a book about his travels. And he reports the conversation that happened between a Dog Rib Indian, which is a branch of the Chippewan Indians, which live up there, and a Catholic priest. This apparently comes from another explorer, Warburton Pike. And the priest was trying to convert the Dog Rib Indian, the Chippewan, to Catholicism. "Tell me, Father, what is this white man's heaven?" The priest replies, "It is the most beautiful place in the world." The native replies, "Tell me, Father, is it like the land of little trees when the ice has left the lakes? Are the great musk oxen there? Are the hills covered with flowers? There will I see caribou everywhere I look? Are the lakes blue with the sky of summer? Is every net full of great fat whitefish? Is there room for me in this heaven? Like our land, the barren lands, can I camp anywhere and not find that someone else has camped there? Can I feel the wind and be like the wind? Father, if your heaven is not all these, leave me alone in my land, the land of little sticks." All the fishermen want to know, are you fishing? All the hunters want to know, are you hunting? The answer is probably not, and if I am, something's gone drastically wrong. Fish in general, unless you're talking the really fatty fish, the halibuts, the salmon, the amount of effort taken to procure 100 calories of fish, pretty high protein, pretty high water content, is a lot of work. Most of the energy in their fish and chips comes from the batter and the oil, not from the fish itself. So when the goal is to cover these miles, cover this distance, go from lake to lake to lake as fast as possible, you don't want to take time to fish. Also, inevitably when you fish, you end up with your hands covered in just a greasy fish smelling thing. That's not something you want to take into your tent, smeared on your sleeping bag, smeared on your face, and attract all the bears to where you live. Am I going to hunt? Probably not. Hopefully, if I'm lucky, be passing through some very large caribou herds. I've done this once or twice. It's amazing. Where you pass hundreds of caribou or hundreds of caribou pass you. What am I going to do? I'm going to shoot a caribou? Then you've got 100 pounds of meat. Smoke that? That's going to take a day's. Now I'm traveling with 100 pounds of smoky, smelly meat? No. Keep in mind that when the natives were traveling, and they're traveling with smoky, smelly meat, and a bear came into camp, more food was coming into camp. They could kill that bear and eat it too. So I don't want to be accumulating a giant pile of dead animal carcasses. I am taking a couple rounds of bird shot, that if I totally run out of food, still somehow have my shotgun, that I can bag a goose or two, or ducks, because that's a much more manageable amount of food. That can last a couple of meals, that I could countenance. No point in hunting for bigger animals. I'm not going to be snaring rabbits, again, unless things go totally, completely off the rails and I'm left without any food at all. Other questions? what am I doing for power? How am I going to charge all these electronic devices? The answer is solar panel and praying for sun, and using a solar panel to charge a large battery. This is great, except large batteries are heavy. You're relying on sun, and it's just more stuff that you need to keep dry. The amount of stuff I can put in this boat is pretty small, so somehow I need to figure out, and that's the task for the next week, figuring out how to get all this stuff into a finite amount of space. So, solar panel, when the sun's out, to charge a battery, battery to charge everything else when the sun's not out. We're getting pretty close to the land of the midnight sun. We're getting pretty close to 24 hours of sunlight. It's probably 18, 19 hours of sunlight, and the sun kind of goes down to under the horizon, but it's still light enough. These sunsets are 3 hours long. It's amazing, because the sunset goes under, the sky never gets dark, and then it gets bright again. There's a lot of time to charge electronics if the weather cooperates. Why this particular route? Well, it's an old native route for going from the forests out to the tundra, as the natives were trying to follow the migration of the caribou back and forth. It's just incredible that somebody at some point managed to link all these lakes together. There's a video that I've been making, a Google Earth video following the route, and when you watch it, you're like, oh my God, how did anyone ever figure out how to get from here to there? But they did. So it's an old route that was traveled extensively for thousands of years, not too much nowadays. I've also read a lot about it. Newton Lake was a really important center of native culture. There's a ton of history there. I'm trying to read more about the history. And it's one of those things also that you see a route. I don't know if anyone else has ever done this, but you go and you start looking at a map. And you go, man, I could go from here to there. Isn't that cool? Oh, I could go from there to here. I could connect this to here. You start connecting a route like that, and you can end up with some pretty long trips. And it's just the amazing thing about the Canadian North is about how easy it is to connect these routes. It's easy in theory, hard in practice. It was just recently deglaciated. There was ice up there 7,000, 8,000 years ago. So it hasn't had the time to build up the soil for rivers. To get from the Mississippi to another river, that'd be days of traveling maybe. Up there, two rivers that are going to two different oceans come within 150 feet of each other. Or one lake has got two exits. One lake drains out to Hudson Bay. The other lake drains out to Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic Ocean. Same lake, two exits, two rivers. That doesn't happen once you've had time for the landscape to rationalize. But it's really, in geologic times, it's very, very recent. It hasn't been deglaciated for that long. Is there any civilization along the way? There's another question people have. Sort of, kind of. There are a few small native settlements, probably in the 120 to 200 people range, so they'll have a store. But by store, I mean a 7-Eleven is probably better stocked. In terms of food, it's really not very good food. And, usually come out of there with a head of iceberg lettuce, a thing of Caesar salad dressing, and then some bags of chocolate chips. There are 2 or 3 places. There's Brochet, Lac Brochet, and there's a few other places I could branch off to if I had to. If I had to go out of my way, if I had to bail early, if I just get totally skunked by the weather or my arm falls off. There are other places I could bail out up till about halfway. At the halfway mark, if they start getting up towards Newton Lake, there's nothing. There's nothing until you get to Hudson Bay. I mean, even in Hudson Bay, there's nothing. Once you get to Hudson Bay, if you turn left, you can go 50 kilometers up to Arviat. If you turn right, you can go 200 kilometers down to Churchill. I have traveled on Hudson Bay before. It's really dangerous. It's crazy ass dangerous. If I can at all avoid it, I will. If I can get somebody to come from Arviat with a big boat, with a motor, I'll happily pay for that. The thing about Hudson Bay is it's 14-foot tides and 5 miles of tidal flats. So when the water goes out, you have white water going out to sea with big rocks. And then when you're out at sea, you can't actually see land anymore, because at Hudson Bay, the land is really, really flat. So you've got your compass and you're going, I think I should be going this way. I hope this compass works, because you can't see land and you're kind of paddling to where, like, oh, I can hit the ground here. I think I'm going in the right direction. I'm not going out the wrong way. And Hudson Bay is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles across. You get washed out of Hudson Bay, you're dead. Then when the tide comes back in, you've got 5 miles of rapids going inland. And if you camp inland and the tide goes out, as far away as you can see, you just see rocks and an intertidal. Maybe you see a tiny bit of water there. It's really tough traveling. An offshore storm comes up, you're dead. Tons of polar bears there. One gets you in the middle of the night, you're dead. You tip your boat, you're probably dead. It's also beautiful. There are tons of, I paddled with the belugas on Hudson Bay. It's one of the highlights of my life, paddling amidst a beluga pod. I wrote an article about that. If you look for an article on graparts.com called something like Bears, Belugas, and an Offshore Tide on Hudson Bay, you'll find it. It was amazing. That was also only 50 kilometers on Hudson Bay from the outlet of the Seal River to Churchill. This would be closer to 200 kilometers to get all the way to Churchill. Churchill's a reasonably big hub, city of a couple thousand people on a train line. That's a long way to go, especially by yourself. And hopefully I don't have to do that. So there is civilization towards the end, but it's not exactly at the end. It's either 50 kilometers left or 200 kilometers right along the bay.